Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tina and I am the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up is a part of the Info Exchange Group. Info Exchange is a not-for-profit social enterprise that has delivered technology for social justice for over 25 years. With over 100 staff across Australia and New Zealand, we tackle the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar, Meeting the Efficiency Challenges in the NDIS, which will be presented by Rod Payne from CUSP. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel and I'll be able to assist you through there. If you have any questions during the session, please also type it into the questions box and Rod will be able to answer them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. We'd appreciate it if you took a few minutes to provide us with some feedback. So that's all from me for now. I'll hand it over to Rod to get things started. Thanks, Rod.
Terrific, thanks Tina, and welcome along. So my name's Rod Payne. I'm with an organisation called CUSP. We've done a lot of background work on selection of software and business processes, the changes that are needed associated with the move to the NDIS. We provide a service, a shared service, which I'll explain to you in that process, but equally we've really tried to go deep on the process that got us here, so that we talk to you about the selection and the steps that we went through, etc., in the hopes that you may not use our service, but you may be interested in how we arrived at this point. So I'll launch straight into it. So what we do, give you a little bit of background about us. We'll talk to you about the functionality that we've concentrated on and why. A bit about the software selection process, a bit about our process in terms of helping organisations potentially use the service, and then some content about next steps. Just to give you a sense as to who the organisation is, so CUSP really came together through three organisations working together. Connecting Up you've heard about, critical for us in terms of their linkage to industry and technology skills, strong marketing, etc. The organisation I came from, which is called Forethought, we ran a lot of transformations and program management activity, so spent a lot of time in terms of building out that organisational change planning and business process. And then SMEs in this case is talking about subject matter experts. So we pulled a group of staff from our customers into this shared service, and because we recognised that we needed to have people who had hands-on real-world experience. So that's the combination that's made up CUSP, those three. It's a bit jargon, apologies for that, and if I get a bit jargony, I was an IBM partner and things, so I've got a bit of a background in terms of the technology. The business process as a service is really just another way of saying shared service. So, and what we're offering is we're offering both the software, and you'll see right down the bottom there in the blue, plus also the people. So that combination of the software plus the people and the business processes associated with it is what we've called business process as a service. In terms of why, this is a direct quote from one of our customers, and just really recognising how many sort of spinning plates are on in this big change to the NDIS, overwhelming complexity everywhere. And what we've done is we've concentrated on the back office functions, and again I'll show you what they are, and really allowed our customer organisations to stay focused on service delivery, the changes that are needed in staffing, a whole range of issues that have come up as a result of NDIS. I guess this is the other piece about why. So we we really can eliminate a great deal of risk. We've already developed the business processes, we've got the system in place, we've got an experienced team, and we're providing the service. You can, sort of see it, we can demonstrate it, we can show you all of that sort of process. We've really focused in on with a real sort of technology focus and a business process focus. We're running it at a sort of reasonable scale, and that's allowed us to be cost effective. So already sort of driving that. We've really taken quite a detailed process of evaluation, and I'll show you the steps we went through there. And we were particularly looking for software that had both an as a service, scalable, delivered from the cloud, etc., but also something that had a long-term future. And the particular technology we're talking about, which is Salesforce based, definitely has that. These guys have won most innovative company in the world, probably a dozen times. Multiple customers provide scale. So one of the things we were looking to do was to make sure that we were operating at scale. That allows us to then influence our vendor organisations to make sure that that licenses are cost effective. But we also get this benefit of applied learning, meaning that if one organisation is having difficulties in terms of the NDIA portal and how the accounts receivable functionality is working in that space, that sort of headache can be shared with the other customer organisations, particularly if once we've found the solution to it. So quite an effective way for us to be able to operate. We started this journey out talking about administrative savings. So what we were aiming to do was make sure our back office was very cost effective, but we found that a lot of the real operational a lot of the savings actually fell in the operations area. In people being able to get to their location effectively, in dealing with things like travel, including payment for travel. So a whole bunch of operational issues have actually sort of come up, and operational opportunities, I guess. And I'll give you a bit of a flavour of those with a real example as we go through this. And then finally, the intention there is we partner. We let you concentrate on your core business, your values-based participant or customer-facing role, and we concentrate on the back office and really make sure we're very good at that. In theory, you could sort of stop here, because if that premise, those ideas that make sense to you, then the next stage is where we start to go in and explain how the business processes work and how we made the software selection and all of those sort of things. Is just sort of background because we will partner with you. But I think in terms of you making good decisions and being aware of what's happening in the market more generally, what we've done is spend quite a bit of time to explain how we got here, and hopefully that's useful to you. So the services, and I'll go through these relatively quickly. Inquiry and intake. So a lot of focus in people coming through an inquiry. We run on a sort of script basis, capturing the information, working to our customers' particular needs and scripts. But it also allows us to help with that initial qualification of customers, things like what are their funding sources and family relationships and medical contacts, etc. If we get this piece right and done well, it really it allows you to grow, but it also allows you to quickly ascertain that these people are going to be, the participants in particular, are going to be a good fit. We don't do everything. We have this idea of sort of simple and complex. So if it's a simple transaction, somebody calling up interested in terms of understanding what's available, etc., we can help with some of those. As soon as it gets into the process of creating a contract, that's something that we see as critical for our customers' business and not something that we should be playing in. And so we make sure that we pass that information across and access to the system with it, and in terms of creating the actual service agreement. And this service contract management piece is very important. If you can get the service contracts right and mapped to the NDIA service lines, it dramatically improves the process of being able to do the claims process, making sure that you're not getting errors that are sort of bouncing you out of that. And it also allows you to be very effective in terms of allocating to a support coordination or team leader for them actually to sort of fill out the documentation, make sure it's a very effective service contract and well suited to the participant. We also, and we spend a lot of time in a daily basis in this scheduling function. So this is the process of mapping mobile workforce in particular to participants and making sure that travel time's taken into account, that there's a good match of the people and the skill sets that they have, that we're getting them out in a timely fashion, that we're rescheduling, that we're juggling all of the problems of people who were potentially going to turn up and called in sick on the day or whatever it happens to be. So this is a really critical dimension of the work that we're doing, and a really important one for our customers as well. Accounts receivable. So as you know, I'm sure the NDIA portal's hard work. If we can improve that process, bulk upload to the NDIA portal, it saves a tremendous amount of time, but it also saves a lot of errors. And as we learn from different customers, we're able to see if there's a changeover. There was a big one at the end of financial year, for example, with the NDIA, where service contracts weren't being renewed, but the service provider wasn't being advised of that. So there's some very useful sort of cross-customer information that we can provide, and we can also manage other revenue sources, so self-managed or privately funded, etc. Reporting, the Salesforce solution itself is very powerful in terms of reporting, and I know that this is a big focus area with the audit and safeguards push that's coming through at the moment. And so we've just explained a few of the sort of areas of standardised reports. Service agreements expiring, we can get into details of monies that are unallocated, so not used at that point in time. Lots of information about the worker side to things and how well all that's playing as your worker, as their focus changes. So very powerful in terms of the reporting work. Next piece, we're just going to talk a little bit about the software itself and about how we went through that selection process. So just to explain, when I was still with IBM, we did a piece of work on a consulting basis for NDIS. So of their 1,000 or so members at the time, we surveyed 137, and really we're going deep on what did they need, what platforms were they currently using, what was their feedback. We built out a lot of content in terms of functional requirements, so really spent quite a bit of time in terms of understanding at a really fine level of detail what was a good fit in the different areas. And then we went out to the market itself and spoke to the market to understand how good a fit they were, against the criteria that we had defined. Now, I want to be clear that we had a preference, and I've laid them out there. So we wanted it to be software as a service, so cloud-based, for a couple of reasons. One is it's very scalable if it's cloud-based and obviously available anywhere. And the other one is that if it's software as a service, the improvements to the software end up going into the same code base. Salesforce is very big. They've probably got across the globe 50,000 not-for-profit organisations. So all of the improvements that happen in the code base end up going in and improving everybody's experience. So that was another key reason in terms of why a cloud-based or software as a service. We were looking at functional coverage. We really went quite deep in terms of understanding what functions were delivered. We wanted to make sure that it was already being used in the sector. So you'll see on the market options there, we wouldn't have considered something like Oracle or SAP because it's not being used. We wanted to make sure it was cost effective in terms of the use. And Salesforce, again, is very good in that they offer a percentage of their revenue, their profit and their people's time as a sort of give back. And that really benefits for not-for-profits. And also some of the original code came out of work that was done with the South Australian government, and they gifted that code, if you like, across to one of our partner organisations, Lumery, which has kept the cost low. So as it switched from a state-based operation to a national operation under the NDIS, a lot of that code was reusable, and they were able to push it across. And then the other one that's critical for us is just the fact that it's not going to be outdated fast, or locked into a particular technology that's going to get bypassed. So that's what we were looking for, and came out strongly in terms of a Salesforce-based solution. And particularly, we looked at a few applications that sit on that. So if I talk about Lumery or Schedulo or Pendula, they're actually all Salesforce applications. So they're written using a common code, sit on top of the Salesforce solution, but they're specialist functions that are particular to this industry. The other piece that we did a lot of work on is we built out the business processes. So the technology was good, but the business processes weren't created to sort of map to that, and so that meant we had difficulty talking to the operations staff and explaining how this was going to work. We had difficulty in terms of the training process, and we also needed to have something like this in order to genuinely understand that it was a good fit. And it's one of the key things we test really early in the process is how good are the business processes a fit. Apologies that this is not something you can read. Some of this is, we just incorporated a few examples, because if you've done it, creating a business process seems really easy, but it's actually very difficult to do and do well. So it's something we've really concentrated on. I'll give you a really high-level walk through the system. It's a slightly old version of the screens. The Salesforce has just gone through it's called a lightning upgrade, and the screens are a bit better. But I've got a slightly old version of it. But just to give you a sense as to how this operates. So this first one that always reminds me of sort of the London Underground. It shows you the Lumery down the left-hand side there, inquiries and referrals, intake management, client management, support agreements, job creation, those functions carried out by Lumery. Schedulo is much more task-oriented, so about resource allocation and availability and scheduling, and lots of work in terms of the mobile side. And then back into things like Lumery and Salesforce for the things like invoicing and interface to other systems, as well as reporting functionality. So again, all of these are based on the Salesforce solution, but they're specific applications that have been built with specific functionality in there. And I'll give you just a few screens to show you what that means. This is the service agreement, and you can see there that there's a service agreement name, a funding type, a client, current balance in terms of the contract that's available to this particular service provider, how much has been delivered, how much is remaining. And then right down the bottom there's a breakdown of the service agreement items. So this is the sort of area where we would be looking to a support coordinator or to a support worker, team leader, somebody within their customer's business who really understands how those service agreements need to be structured, to be actively involved in setting this up. But it would be in a format that's standardised. So we would make sure that it maps back to the NDIA functions, that the amounts all reconcile, that we are able to update what's going on from NDIA, etc. So there's a really good combination there. And the reason we focus so much on this one is if we get this right, it makes the remaining process really streamlined and much more effective, and also makes sure the payment arrangements are much more effective. This starts to show Ben as a support worker and talks about resource attributes, and Salesforce, or Scheduler in particular, has a very good basis of being able to map attributes. So whether they've got working with vulnerable people or working with children, whether they've got a valid driver's license at that point in time, but also that is male and is of a particular age and he's got interests that are similar to some of the participants or customers. And so very good in terms of that mapping process. It works the other way as well. If there have been difficulties in the past and we don't want Ben to see a particular person, we can make sure that that's the case, and the system will record that. And this will only surface support workers who have a reasonable match. So if you've got a large pool of resource workers and you're making these sort of early selections, or you need to do it on a particular day, this will only surface people who are a good match. This starts to show you what the scheduler would see. So there's an assumption in this system that there's a central scheduling function that is looking at the support workers and making sure that all that juggling of who's next and somebody was away on leave or somebody's in the right physical geography, all of those sort of things are being worked through. The system uses things like geolocation off your smartphone. So, and most people have a smartphone these days, we find, so it can track that you've actually arrived at your participant's location. If you're a mobile worker, who's available, can give you details of travel time, etc. Very important this in starting to focus on operations improvements and utilisation of staff and some of those areas that are critical long term. And this is what this next one, the dashboard, sort of starts to show. So it's showing you jobs by status, what's happening at that point in time. But if you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there, it starts to show you areas of job duration, travel time per job, utilisation for this particular group, on-time ratio, and so on. So again, very strong in terms of its reporting capability, and very important, we think, in terms of starting to shift the approach from being, to get to the sort of levels of efficiency that are going to be needed under NDIS. Now this one's sort of switching to Ben, and assuming he's using his smartphone, and he's got a new job coming through. It shows you what's coming up through the day, and you can scroll through that. You can see your planning. Apologies, this one happens to be in Sydney, but just to give you an idea, and shows you the little breakdown. It'll actually show you details of traffic problems, etc. It'll show you the individual job, and if you remember, we talked about Mary Jones one stage earlier and what the individual therapy was. So it tells her the job coming up, or tells him rather the job coming up. This next screen is saying in progress. So the intention there is you've physically arrived at the location, you press the in progress side. The scheduler functionality has just released a new version that's got timesheeting functionality built into it. So that'll mean for all of this billable work, instead of having to do lots of calculations and checks on people and whether they're meeting the schedule, you'll have it built into the system. It'll be scheduled. You'll be able to see if they're delivered against that schedule item, and then just generate a report on exceptions. Shows you Mary Jones, background, all of those sort of things. The next one's talking about the job. So it shows you what the service name is. It allows you to have goals in there, and a lot of these fields are something you can modify. So provide Mary with day-to-day support, alerts, things like the dog on residence, and if there's details about medication or those sort of things that need to be sort of captured, then they can be done at the same time. And case notes, the intention there is that you're out there, you're probably not spending a lot of time in terms of capturing case notes. You can use similar systems for very comprehensive case notes and those sort of details if you need to, but in this case the intention is that you're out there, provide the service. If in the case of, as is mostly the case, there's nothing unusual, you're probably not going to get much in the way of case notes. Once you're finished with that process, you log out effectively. You show that you finished the in progress, and it's recorded the time start to finish and the fact you were physically at that location. So I hope that gives you a sort of idea of the system. You can tailor the reporting out of it, very powerful in terms of that. And so average revenue paid per hour, billable time, engagement for casual workers. You know, the big thing here, I guess, is that you need information to make good decisions, particularly about you know, changes in terms of current practice, and it's very good in terms of being able to provide that detail. Transition. So transition's often a really big risk for organisations. The organisational change isn't really understood in a lot of detail and not managed particularly well. That's an area where my organisation's background was strong. For Forethought, we did a lot of work in that space, complex systems integration and transformation work. So yeah, big focus on the implementation activity. And lots of planning processes, lots of details that we've already sort of built out. So something that we can leverage, and something I suggest to you is critical in terms of making sure that any big change that you're making will work. These administration and operational benefits, I've just incorporated some. I've taken out the customer's name, but used some real examples just to give you a sort of flavour of some of the benefits that we have flown through. Because in some cases it's been a surprise to us where the benefits have arrived. We sort of understood in terms of some of the general administration, but some of the operational benefits have been surprising. So first one, timesheets, being able to you know, capture information in an online basis. You've seen on the smartphone, reduce overpayments, ensure that staff are on site as expected, etc. Ability to track participants' remaining funds. The incident reporting, that's proved to be an important one. And again, for this particular customer, they had an ombudsman asking questions about details, and their ability to be able to generate reports on all of that instead of going back and pulling together all of the emails manually, all of the background information manually, that was a big time saving. NDIS portal reconciliation. So this is again a big one for anyone who's having to put in individual records or you know, generate exception reporting out of the NDIA. This is a big benefit and one that's really helped us a lot. Bulk load and invoicing we've sort of talked about. Sorry, I probably didn't quite update this as I should have. Groups functionality. So if there's a group that gets together and you need to allocate costs for all of the different group attendees, the systems, we're building up the functionality to be able to do that. The ability to be able to match customer and employee data. This scheduling and rostering is a really critical one. If we can, you know, in part, if we can make sure that the system is well structured and easy to use for organisations that are sort of somewhat competitive in terms of their support workers, you know, who might work at a few different places. Being able to use something easily and readily is actually a bit of a differentiator and a valuable one. You can interface into things like awards interpretation, payroll systems, etc. So very powerful in those sort of areas as well. And then what we did for these ones in particular was create a little business case for it. So I identify the if you look in the top left-hand corner, it talks about the people side to things, what you would need to actually spend in terms of the effort you're currently spending, and on the right-hand side, it starts to show that you need to make an investment in terms of the transition and what the ongoing costs are. So, but important to be able to talk about that in sort of business plan or business terms, so that you can see that the investment's worthwhile. So really, that's it. It was I've just put this same slide in again. That it's really about risk management, spreading the risk by working closely with somebody else who's already done it. A a lot of focus on the automation and standardisation, and we've brought the right people in to make sure that we do that and do it well. As you can see, hopefully, we've been through this really detailed process of evaluation. We're very confident that it's a good combination of software and it's working. Multiple customers helps us all learn and also helps us all get the benefits of scale, administration operations, and then the key piece there is you concentrate on your core business and values, and we concentrate on ours. So, Tina, I might pass back to you if I can, and just see if there's questions or content people would like.
Sure, we've got a few questions that have come through. So the first one is, how long does a transition typically take?
I'll give you the good consulting answer, sorry, in that it depends on how big the organisation is and how complex that is. We've had them go from, anything from probably 3 weeks through to probably 6 or 7 weeks. So it's not a really long process, because in part we've got the team in place who'll sort of catch the work. More difficult if you're training your own team up. You might be talking about longer time frames. You might be talking about sort of 3 months for a reasonably complex one.
Okay, next question is, how do you split invoicing if people want to charge some services to NDIS portal and some to a personal account?
So in that service contract basis, that's where that's done. So you can allocate it as being NDIS funded or funded elsewhere. So yeah, as long as the service contract is maintained clearly, then you can make sure that those distinctions as to the funding source is clear.
Okay, does it interface into other accounting packages?
So far, Xero, MYOB, trying to remember what the other one is. There's one other commonly used one that it's interfacing into already. Yeah, so fairly seamless, as long as it's a relatively standard solution that's out there at the moment.
In relation to the previous question about splitting the invoices, the same person has asked, can one person have 2 contracts then?
You could do it that way. You could have some sort of differentiator in terms of how you identify the individual. Salesforce attempts not to let you do that because it doesn't want to have, it wants sort of one source of truth. So it doesn't want to have multiple versions that are sitting around there and creating confusion. But I'm sure that if we needed to and we wanted to identify some sort of slight variation, tag an extra field onto it to explain the funding source, that we can do that.
Okay, can you explain the difference between a simple query and a complex one?
So this is going back to those sort of inquiries and intake process. It's really just to make sure that and the example we use is a bit like a sort of a GP receptionist. So you've got a receptionist there who's got an important job but is not paid at the same sort of rates as the doctors. You don't want the doctors to be answering all of the questions. So that's the sort of thinking associated with it. We've built out scripts of what we would consider simple answers, things that can be scripted relatively easily and the responses fit. And then we have this idea of complex, where it's sort of booted out of that process pretty quickly if there's anything that's unusual in terms of needing special attention or needing a deeper conversation with the participant and so on.
Okay, can we visit the team in South Australia?
Absolutely. So and or we can demonstrate the system online if that's easier to do.
You talked about efficiency savings in scheduling. Can you give some real examples of the savings?
I'm just trying to think probably what the best way to do that, I think, is I might try and find an example of one of the business plans or a better set of those benefit details, and perhaps Tina, I'll send that to you, and you could send that on.
Yep,
It might
perfect.
be
I can
easier
send
than
that
to
out
try
with
and
the
step forward.
recording. Yep. So once you send that through, I'll attach it to the recording and send it to everyone. And the next question, which is the final question, is what is the first step that everyone needs to take?
Well, hopefully we're giving you a bit of a guideline in terms of what we think are the main steps in making these sort of changes. And we're not saying that you necessarily would come to CUSP, but whichever way you did, the process of focusing on the transition, going through the evaluation criteria, making sure you've got your business processes, I think that they're the key items. If you are interested in working in our sort of partnership model, then what we would typically do is have a conversation and then go through the business processes with you pretty well straight away, because if we're not a good fit in terms of a standard approach, then we can't maintain the cost savings that we need to be able to give you. So it's very important to us that we can operate in a relatively standard way. So just on that, so far we've found that we haven't found any organisations that haven't fitted a relatively standard approach, and a little bit of that's because the NDIA is new, so people haven't sort of locked on to a different way of operating, but that'll be an important first step.
Great. Was there anything that you wanted to add, Rod?
No, just to say thank you. Thanks for your time, and thanks for the opportunity to have a bit of a chat about it, and best of luck in terms of next steps.
Great. Thanks very much, Rod, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've all learnt a lot from this presentation and we answered all of your questions. If you do have any questions that come to your mind later on, or any feedback about the webinar, please send that through to events@connectingup.org and we will answer those questions offline. Don't forget that the recording will be available on our website very shortly, and a link will be sent to you, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rod.
Cool. Thank you.